This lesson, we're going to be talking about how to solve a quadratic by factoring. So we're going to take what we've been working on, which is factoring, and taking it one step further. So the steps for what you're going to need to know how to do are the following. Step 1, you want to take your equation and always make sure it's set equal to 0. So if you have it equal to something else, or if there's numbers or variables on the other side, you want to move them all to one side and get your equation to equal 0. Second step, you want to factor completely. Factor the whole thing. There might be a GCF, and the types of factoring might be different, so always make sure that you're factoring the whole thing as much as you can. And step 3, you want to set each factor equal to 0. So you're going to get something with some groups. It's going to be like some group multiplied another group when you factor equal to 0. And what you're going to do is you're going to take each separate group and set it equal to 0. The reason that you do that is because 0 times anything is equal to 0. So if my green group equals 0, then it doesn't matter what my purple group is, because 0 times purple is equal to 0. If my purple group is equal to 0, it doesn't matter what my green is, because purple, which is 0, so 0 times green is equal to 0. So when you're doing this, you might want to say, well, why? What's even the point of solving by factoring? Like, what's even the point of solving? What information does this tell me? So when you have a quadratic, you have a graph that's called a parabola. It's either going to look like a U, like this, or an upside down U, like this. And what it does when you factor is it tells you how many times and where your graph, your parabola, is going to cross the x-axis. So I gave you just 2 examples to look at. So here I have 2 parabolas with no particular equation. They're just sketches. But you'll notice right here, this one crosses 1 time. So I would say that, and I'll show you, or you'll see in your homework, there's an example that's like this, where you have something, your factors are the same answers. So say it was like x plus 1 times x plus 1. Remember when you did that perfect square trinomial, it would be something like this, where you would get one answer, or you would have 2 separate factors like x minus 2, or x plus 2 and x minus 1, something like that, equals 0. It's going to look like this, and it's going to tell you have 2 answers. So that's really what we're trying to find today. When somebody asks you to solve the equation by factoring, they want to know really, where does my graph cross my axis, my x-axis to be specific. So I have 4 examples for you today. We're going to start off easy. The first question, we said our steps where we have to make sure our equation is set equal to 0. Check. Then I have to factor. This one's already factored for us. So I'm going to take each group and I'm going to set it equal to 0. So here I have one group, x plus 4, and here I have another group, x minus 9. So I'm going to say x plus 4, set it equal to 0. Then I'm going to take x minus 9, set it equal to 0. We'll do my x plus 4 first. I have to get x on a side by itself. So the opposite of positive 4 is negative 4, which means I'm going to subtract 4 from both sides. And I get x is equal to negative 4. The next one, I have to get x on a side by itself. The opposite of negative 9 is positive 9. So I'm going to add 9 to both sides. And I get x is equal to 9. So I have 2 answers. So here I have x is equal to 4 and x is equal to 9. When you're doing these, you're either going to get 1 or 2 answers. Question number 2. This one's a little bit harder. So I go through all my steps. Step number 1, is my equation set equal to 0? Check. Now I have to factor. So I have to remember all the ways that I practice factoring, and I notice that here I don't have any number out in front. So I'm just going to say, okay, I need to know what numbers multiply to negative 10. And I want to add to positive 3. So you can go through and you can list out all of your factors. But I happen to know that positive 5 minus 2 is equal to 3, and positive 5 times negative 2 is equal to negative 10. So when I factor this, I would have x plus 5 times x minus 2 is equal to 0. Now I have to take each one of my groups and set them equal to 0. I'm going to scooch this up so I have a little bit more space. So I take each one of my groups and set it equal to 0. So x plus 5 is equal to 0. And x minus 2 is equal to 0. So I set each one and solve. So the opposite of positive 5 is negative 5. So I'm going to subtract 5 from both sides. And I get x is equal to negative 5. There's one answer. X minus 2 equals 0. The opposite of negative 2 is positive 2. And so I get x is equal to positive 2. So this graph crosses in two different spots at x is equal to negative 5 and x is equal to positive 2. Okay, next. We're getting a little harder every time we move on. So here, step number 1, I first have to set my equation equal to 0. When you're factoring, it's always easiest if your x squared value is positive. So I'm going to take everything that's on the right-hand side and I'm going to move it to the left-hand side. First thing I'm going to move is my 4x. The opposite of positive 4x is negative 4x. This cancels out, so I have 4x squared plus 4x is equal to 15. Now I need to move that 15, so to do that, the opposite of positive 15 is negative 15. And when I'm doing this, I'm combining my like terms at the same time. So I have 4x squared plus 4x minus 15 equals 0. So now I have to factor. When I'm factoring, because I have a number here out in front, I have to first multiply these together. 4 times negative 15 is negative 60. So I want to multiply to get negative 60, and I want to add together to get positive 4. You might want to stop the video here, and if you need to take some time to list out all of your factors, go right ahead. I happen to know that a positive 10 times a negative 6 multiplies to negative 60, and a positive 10 plus a negative 6 is equal to 4. So my factors, when I'm doing this, I have to rewrite it out like this. 4x squared, whoops. And I'm going to go plus 10x minus 6x minus 15 is equal to 0. Now I'm going to do this by groups. I'm going to split this up into two groups and see what they have in common. 4x squared and 10x have in common a 2x. So this becomes a 2x plus 5. And a negative 6x and a negative 15 have in common a negative 3. And I'm left with 2x plus 5. Both of these groups now have a 2x plus 5 in common. And what am I left with? 2x minus 3. Oops, and I'm running out of space. Let me just move this problem down for a minute. Okay. So now I have to take each one of my groups. I have to take this pink group and this blue group, and I set them each equal to 0. So 2x plus 5 is equal to 0. And 2x minus 3 is equal to 0. These are a little bit harder to solve. So we'll do the one on the left first. First thing I have to do is move that 5. So I'm going to subtract 5 from both sides. So I get 2x is equal to negative 5. And to undo that 2, I'm going to divide. And you can leave your answer just as a fraction. There you go. And if we solve our next one, first thing I have to do is get rid of that negative 3. So I'm going to add 3 to both sides. I get 2x is equal to positive 3. And to undo that 2, I'm going to divide both sides by 2. And I get x is equal to 3/2. So my parabola is going to cross my axis 2 times at negative 5/2 and 3/2. You can leave your answers just like as a fraction, or if you want, you can change them into a decimal.